Why does someone who says, "I killed because I loved," carry the pain of guilt until their last breath? This phrase, whispered by Daniel Wexler seconds before his execution, is not just a confession. It's a scream trapped in the chest, a deep fissure in what we understand as love and violence. Have you ever wondered what drives a seemingly ordinary man to cross that invisible line between affection and murder? What you're about to discover may surprise you and perhaps make you look at love in a way you never imagined. The sentence had been handed down, the chair was approaching, but something inside Daniel still bled, an open wound that no prison could close. There was no hatred in his voice, no desperate plea for forgiveness, only a heavy silence, echoing louder than any scream. It was the pain of someone who killed someone they loved and hates themselves for it to this day, a pain that doesn't heal with time, that lingers like a shadow in every thought, in every final breath. Imagine being in his shoes, caught between remorse and emptiness, knowing that the love that consumed him was also the force that destroyed everything. What would you do if your deepest feeling became the reason for your own downfall? How many cases like this exist, buried beneath the surface of stories of crimes of passion, where the line between affection and control blurs, and the line between justice and tragedy dissolves into silence? At the heart of this confession lies an emotional abyss that many try to avoid. The idea that love can be a prison, an invisible jail where the fear of abandonment becomes a deadly weapon. Daniel wasn't a monster from distant stories, but a dark reflection of a complex psychology, where the desire for possession and the idealization of the other intertwine with unresolved traumas, suffocating insecurities, and an unbearable fear of losing what matters most. Have you ever been there? Have you felt that loving someone too much could be the beginning of their downfall? The unhealthy relationship, the jealousy that turns into surveillance, the sweet words that hide veiled threats. All of this is part of a pattern that, when ignored, can explode into violence, a violence many prefer to call a crime of passion, but which carries deep layers of suffering and internal conflict. What Daniel said in his final moments was not an apology, but a warning. He wanted to be seen, understood, acknowledged before his fate was sealed. He wanted someone to understand that behind that fatal decision lay a man consumed by a love that had lost its way and turned a sharp knife against himself and against the one he claimed to love. What you're about to hear is more than a crime story. It's a dive into the fragmented mind of someone who loves too much and loses himself in that feeling. A journey through the criminal psychology of a man who didn't want to kill but couldn't find another way out. Let's go back to the beginning, to the exact moment when love stopped being a shelter and became a weapon, revealing secrets that still echo in the cold corridors of justice. Prepare to face questions that don't have easy answers. Questions that challenge everything you think about love, guilt, and redemption. Because the truth lies not just in the final act, but in every silent step that led to it. And that truth is about to be revealed. Daniel Wexler was the perfect picture of success and normalcy. At 42, life seemed to smile upon him generously. A respected name in the world of architecture, a career that shone with award-winning projects, and the pride of being a devoted father to an 8-year-old daughter. To those who knew him, he was the man who, even on the most difficult days, found sweet words for his wife, the woman he called my eternity. This expression, repeated fondly, seemed more than a simple declaration of love. It was a silent pact, a promise engraved in the soul, a shared future. But on that fateful night of May 12th, something inside Daniel broke. The same hand that drew dreams constructed a gesture of destruction that would have no return. There was no history, no accusations, no signs of what was to come. That gentle man, beloved by friends and family, never imagined he could cross the fine line between love and horror. And yet he did. Behind that facade lurked a silent, progressive transformation, a subtle shift that went unnoticed even by those closest to him. Daniel's mentality began to distort under the weight of a feeling too intense to be carried without wounds. He who loved too much began to lose control of what he felt, of what he desperately needed to preserve. It wasn't just jealousy. It was an urgency to hold on to something that seemed to slip through his fingers, a hidden truth that only he saw or believed he saw. The impact of this internal collapse was devastating. Daniel's emotional fragility, fueled by fears and insecurities, found no room to breathe. What should have been protection became a prison, and the relationship that seemed like a safe haven became a trap. He wasn't a cold psychopath, nor a calculating killer. He was a man who decided to act on the confusion of his mind and the pain of imminent abandonment. What many would consider irrational, for him, had a perverse meaning, a twisted logic, a last desperate act of love that no one else could understand. This tragic decision shattered not only a life, but also the expectations of everyone who thought they knew Daniel. Deep within that man, a profound conflict unfolded. The desire to preserve his bond with his wife versus the unbearable fear of being left behind. This internal war is one of the most complex aspects of criminal psychology when it comes to crimes of passion. Daniel didn't kill out of anger, nor out of hate. He killed because his love became a torment, a destructive force that consumed his identity and pushed him toward an abyss of no return. The transformation that led him to that extreme act was slow, full of signs and small cracks that no one could see or perhaps chose to ignore. And this is part of what makes cases like this so disturbing. They reveal the inner workings of the human mind when pushed to its limit. At first glance, it's easy to label Daniel a monster, a villain who has surpassed all ethical and legal boundaries. But the hidden truth behind this story is much more disturbing and nuanced. It's the story of a mind torn apart by pain, of decisions made in the heat of unseen suffering, and of a system that often fails to identify the cracks before it's too late. In his confession, Daniel didn't ask for forgiveness. He expressed a regret that surpasses common understanding, a pain that resonates beyond the cold prison walls. This duality between love and destruction, between victim and perpetrator, is what makes this story an intense study of the complexity of human emotions and criminal psychology. Daniel was someone desperately seeking to reinvent himself and control his destiny, but he ended up a victim of his own decisions and a mental pattern that imprisoned many before him. His story shows that, behind such a shocking crime, there is a chain of choices, traumas, and emotional triggers that lead to the breaking point. And it is precisely this chain that we must understand to try to prevent other lives from being lost along the same path. As society searches for answers, Daniel's case remains an uncomfortable mirror, reflecting truths we'd rather not face: how love can turn into obsession, and how the fear of loss can lead to the end of everything. It's a story that challenges our perception of right and wrong, that shakes our beliefs about what truly motivates crime, and that exposes, without filters, the dark underbelly of the collapsed human mind. Criminal psychology, in this context, is not just a field of study, but a key to unraveling these enigmas, to understanding how and why a man loved by many could, at the height of his grief, decide to snuff out the life of the one he claimed to love eternally. Daniel Wexler didn't go down in history simply as a convicted murderer. He became a living symbol of the contradictions that inhabit the human heart, of the choices made between love and despair, of the mental transformation that can drive an ordinary person to extremes. What happened that night is an invitation to look beyond the crime, to penetrate the deepest layers of the psyche, and to question what we truly know about what drives human behavior in its darkest moments. This is where everything begins to unfold. This isn't just about one man and one crime. It's about the impact that one decision, no matter how tragic, can have on a complex system of emotions, relationships, and hidden truths. This is where the true mystery unfolds in Daniel's fragmented mind, in his untold past, in the choices no one noticed, and in what he said before the end, leaving a legacy that defies reason and entangles us all in a web of questions without easy answers. That night began like so many others. The house was illuminated by warm lights, the subtle aroma of dinner still lingering in the air, and ambient music filled the silent spaces between words. Daniel and his wife, Clara, sat at the table with smiles that seemed too relaxed for those carrying invisible tensions. The red wine swirled in the glass, while the laughter, though light, hid something neither of them dared to speak. It was as if each word, each gesture, was a fragile piece in a delicate dance, a tenuous balance that night was about to break. At 11:14 p.m., it broke. A dry, abrupt sound that spread through the neighborhood like an ominous crack. The neighbors heard it, but they didn't know what was happening behind the walls of that house that until then had seemed like a fortress of love and stability. After the noise came absolute silence, the kind of silence that fills the air with an almost palpable weight, as if time had frozen. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the silence of collapse, of the invisible end that no one could prevent. When the police arrived, they found Clara slumped over the sketches of Daniel's new project, which she had so strongly supported. The scene seemed a cruel paradox. The woman who shared dreams and plans, now motionless, surrounded by drawings that symbolized the future she would never have. Beside the body, a letter scraped out, incomplete, filled with crossed-out words and ink blots, became the enigma that would define the case. The message began with a mysterious sentence: "If you knew what I saw in that look." But this sentence never reached its conclusion. It hung in the air, like an invitation to decipher a secret that was never revealed. This letter, as fragmented as the relationship between Daniel and Clara itself, became a key piece in the trial, not only for what it didn't say, but for what it suggested. What was hidden in that look? What hidden truth was about to emerge? And most importantly, how could a man who seemed to love turn that look into a motive for tragedy? What happened that night is a clear example of the subtle transformation that can occur within the closest relationships. That house, the scene of so many conversations and plans, witnessed a breakdown that began long before the dull noise, long before the silence that followed. The change in Daniel's mindset, the fissure between love and possession, left traces, signs that few chose to see, or that were lost in the shadows of a seemingly normal routine. This impact wasn't just physical. It was a profound emotional and psychological rupture, where the desire for control became an invisible prison. That kiss exchanged that night, moments before the disaster, carries a cruel irony, a silent farewell, a last attempt to maintain the illusion of normalcy before the abyss. It is at this point that the mystery of the human mind begins to reveal itself, showing how decisions made in an instant can carry the weight of years of hidden suffering. Among the shadows of that house, among the sketches and scratched words, lie the keys to understanding not only the crime, but the complex web of emotions and traumas that preceded it. Every gesture, every silence, every unrequited glance were pieces of a puzzle that culminated in that foretold tragedy. And what makes it all the more disturbing is realizing that, often, these stories repeat themselves in internal transformations that no one sees, a hidden truth that manifests itself in a devastating final act. The impact of this collapse reverberates beyond Daniel and Clara's case. It raises fundamental questions about how we interpret love, control, and despair within human relationships. It reveals the nuances of the decisions people make when caught between reason and emotion, between fear and the need to belong. And it shows how, behind the scenes of everyday life, we often live with invisible dangers, ready to explode at the least expected moment. As the investigation progressed, every detail of that night became a thread pulling together a complex web of repressed emotions and unresolved conflicts. The incomplete letter, the uncomprehended look, The kiss before the silence, all were part of a fragmented narrative that sought meaning in the chaos. It is at this point that the study of criminal psychology gains strength, as it delves into the fragmented mind of a man who, even in the face of the most extreme crime, carried within him a profound humanity, an internal struggle between love and destruction. This story isn't just a horror story, but an invitation to reflect on the limits of love and the shadows that can inhabit even the most passionate hearts. It shows that behind a fatal act, there's always a chain of choices and revelations that deserve to be understood, so we can better understand not only the perpetrator, but also the impact of human relationships on the formation of minds and behavior. What seemed like just another crime of passion thus takes on a deeper dimension, that of an emotional abyss where love, guilt, regret, and a desperate search for meaning intersect. It is in this space between the kiss and the silence, between the incomplete letter and the unspoken truth, that this story continues to unfold, revealing the lost fragments of a collapsing mind and the devastating consequences of decisions made at the limit of reason. As these layers of pain and mystery intertwine, it's impossible not to feel the weight of every choice Daniel made, every step that led him to that final moment of silence and confession. Stories like this remind us that behind every crime lies a fragmented mind, a past that shapes decisions, and a hidden truth that only begins to emerge when we're willing to look beyond the headlines and snap judgments. That's precisely why continuing to follow these stories is so important, not to seek sensationalism, but to understand the hidden depths of human emotions, to delve into the shadows and find answers that often remain buried. If you feel that this exploration of the human mind, the boundaries between love and violence, touches something deep within you, perhaps it's time to join this community that doesn't settle for superficialities. Subscribing here is more than just clicking a button. It's an invitation to walk side by side in this search for truth, understanding, and revelations that can change the way we see the world and ourselves. Each subscription strengthens the possibility of bringing stories that challenge, provoke, and stir the deepest parts of us all. And believe me, what's to come goes beyond what you've ever heard. Buried secrets, fragments of a mind on the verge of collapse, details no one has dared to share. If the curiosity that brought you here is still alive, and if the mystery of this story unsettles you, then being a part of this space is the natural next step. Together, we'll unearth every layer of this plot, understand every decision, and delve into every revelation yet to come. Because this isn't just Daniel Wexler's story, it's the story of many, a mirror of the transformations the human mind can undergo when love becomes a prison and pain becomes the only path left. And this journey is far from over. When Daniel was taken in for questioning, there was no sign of the man many had imagined. Desperate, remorseful, angry, he didn't cry. He didn't deny the facts. He didn't try to escape the consequences. Instead, he spoke with an almost frightening calm, as if telling a truth he'd carried for too long. "I killed because I loved her, and she stopped seeing me." It was that sentence that cut through the silence of the room, carrying a weight that surpassed any simple explanation. That confession became the epicenter of debate among experts, an enigma that challenged everything we knew about what drives a crime. In those few seconds, Daniel's words opened a door to a dark world where love and violence are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. Psychologists, psychiatrists, and criminologists delved into his mind to try to understand what lay behind that blunt and disturbing confession. Extreme emotional dependence, borderline personality disorder, delusional ideation of abandonment. Technical terms that describe an internal turmoil, a mental chaos where reality bends and the fear of loss becomes an unbearable prison. But not every clinical explanation can encompass the depth of that pain, because there was something beyond diagnoses, something visceral, a collapse of affective identity that few can understand. It was as if Daniel had lost not only the woman he loved, but also himself, disintegrated by a feeling so intense that it destroyed his very existence. He didn't kill simply to end her presence. He killed to try to stem the emptiness that grew within him when he realized he had been invisible to the one he claimed to love. That moment of rupture exposed a hidden truth that doesn't appear in the reports, but that echoes in the silences of the soul, the devastation that occurs when love turns to despair. The mental transformation that led Daniel to this point is an extreme example of what psychology calls an existential crisis in people dominated by emotional dependence. When the mind loses its ability to balance emotions and thoughts, decisions made are the result of a state where reality and imagination become blurred, and the fear of abandonment translates into actions that defy logic. This internal struggle has a profound impact on identity, fragmenting perceptions of self and others, and shaping a mindset where love becomes a weapon of destruction. However, this story isn't limited to the individual. It's also a reflection of the social and cultural structures that influence how we understand and experience love. The idealization of possession, the confusion between care and control, the silence surrounding emotional pain, all of this creates fertile ground for tragedies that, while shocking, are more common than one might think. Behind the scenes of this confession, revelations emerge about the impact that toxic patterns and unrealistic expectations have on the formation of human relationships, showing that the path to crime can be paved by years of silent suffering. This statement, so short and so powerful, not only shook public opinion, but also challenged science to explore the depths of the human mind in its darkest moments. It exposes the complexity of emotions that can push us to the edge of sanity, revealing a truth that is difficult to accept. Love, when distorted by pain and dependence, can become the most dangerous double-edged sword there is. It is in this duality that lies the essence of Daniel's internal conflict, a man torn between the need to love and the desperation to be loved. As we progress, we'll better understand how these elements intertwine to form the mental landscape of someone living on the edge of an emotional abyss. How each decision, each fragmented thought, contributed to an outcome that many try to rationalize, but rarely truly understand. The impact of this confession extends beyond the walls of the cell where it was made. It reverberates in reflections on how invisible wounds can shape destinies and how the hidden truths of the mind influence human behavior. Stay with me until the end, because unraveling these layers is more than just understanding a crime. It's an invitation to look within, recognize our own fragilities, and understand how choices made in silence can have consequences that echo forever. And only by continuing this journey will you be able to understand what truly lies behind what Daniel revealed and why this story isn't over yet. They met in the cramped hallways of college, where the future seemed like an open space, full of possibilities and dreams to be built. Daniel Wexler, a talented and ambitious young man, saw in her something that transcended ordinary infatuation, a promise of eternity. That encounter was not only the beginning of a love story, but the beginning of a profound transformation. An encounter was not only the beginning of a love story, but the beginning of a profound transformation. In this profound transformation, his life and mindset. He even abandoned a scholarship abroad, leaving behind a promising career, just to be by her side. A decision many would classify as a romantic gesture, an absolute surrender that seemed to seal a shared destiny. But what began as devotion was quietly transforming into a prison. What seemed like an intense love, full of affection and dedication, gradually became an invisible web of control. Her cell phone wasn't just a device, but a window through which Daniel spied on every message, every call, every friendship he considered a threat. Her freedom was gradually curtailed. Laughter with friends was replaced by uncomfortable silences, and small bouts of jealousy that crept in almost imperceptibly began to shape the couple's daily life. They were subtle fissures, almost invisible to outsiders, but within that universe, they caused irreparable damage. It's a transformation that many mistake for care, but which is actually the disguised face of control. A love that watches, suffocates, and limits. That extreme zeal ceased to be protection and became a prison, and the obsession with maintaining the bond became a mental trap from which Daniel didn't know how to escape. It is this distortion of reality, this tangle of emotions and insecurities, that creates the fertile ground for the emotional breakdown and the extreme decisions that would follow. On the outside, the couple kept up appearances. Well-rehearsed smiles, public encounters, superficial conversations. But behind the scenes, tension grew, silent and destructive. What no one saw was how much their relationship carried the weight of dependence, fear, and a need for control disguised as love. And what makes this dynamic even more devastating is that those involved often don't realize where care ends and imprisonment begins. Criminal psychology shows us that these unhealthy relationships are often the result of a slow, almost invisible development of a mindset that values possession and surveillance over respect and freedom. It's a pattern that takes root, fueled by deep insecurities, past traumas, and a distorted perception of what it means to love. For Daniel, every action his wife took that escaped his control was an existential threat, a sign that his world was crumbling. This distorted perception became a powerful trigger, capable of driving decisions that defy reason and morality. It's important to understand that, in this journey, there are no simplistic heroes or villains. There's a complex web of emotions and experiences that shape behaviors and choices, often leading to a path of no return. The impact of this unhealthy relationship was devastating not only for Clara, but for Daniel as well, who found himself trapped in a cycle of control and dependence that eroded his identity and his ability to discern between love and possession. These revelations about the relationship's behind-the-scenes context help illuminate the hidden truth behind the crime, showing that what appears to be a simple act of violence is often the tragic outcome of a long internal transformation. Control, disguised as care, constant surveillance, and gradual isolation are signs of a mindset that sinks into toxic patterns and, without intervention, can lead to irreparable consequences. The complexity of this story goes far beyond what headlines and snap judgments can capture. It invites us to reflect on how love can become a prison, on the decisions we make guided by fear and insecurity, and on the hidden truths that reveal themselves only when we are willing to look within, even when the pain is unbearable. The end began with a simple word, time, a request that, for Clara, meant space to breathe, to think, to try to salvage what love remained in that suffocating relationship. But for Daniel, that word was like a snap in the deafening silence of his fragmented mind. He didn't see it as a pause, a chance for a new beginning, but rather a sentence, an inevitable abandonment that burned within. His mind locked into a cycle of despair and fear, where her every gesture was interpreted as betrayal, every absence a step toward ultimate abandonment. It was then that the signs of what would become a deadly trigger began. Daniel began to follow her, not physically on the streets, but in the footsteps she left behind, in every unanswered message, in every distant glance. The letters emerged like a desperate echo, attempts to capture a moment that was slipping away, a way to keep alive the illusion of a love that was already disintegrating. Flowers left on the doorstep were symbols of a hope that grew more fragile with each passing day, vivid reminders of what could have been, but was no longer. The last note Clara found, hidden between the pages of a book she barely leafed through, carried a mixture of pain and plea. If you leave, you'll take my heart, and leave me only emptiness. These words, simple yet devastating, revealed the depth of the invisible struggle between them. For Daniel, that note was more than a message. It was a desperate plea for time to stand still, for love not to fade, for abandonment to be postponed. A tragic attempt to freeze a moment before the world fell apart completely. In court, The forensic psychiatrist's analysis was clear and direct, skimming the surface of the crime and delving into the inner workings of Daniel's mind. He didn't want to kill her, the expert said. He wanted to freeze the moment when he was still loved. This statement reveals a hidden and disturbing truth. What motivates the fatal act is often not the desire to destroy, but the unbearable fear of losing. What sustains one's identity? The panic of the void that opens when love is no longer reciprocated. This love that kills defies any traditional definition. If love is care, if love is life, how can we explain a feeling that ends in violence, that destroys rather than protects? It's a contradiction that defies logic and forces psychology to investigate the limits of affection, obsession, and pain. In the impact of this conflict, the mind fragments, decisions become irrational, and despair creates a distorted narrative. Where a violent end seems the only way out of nameless suffering, the transformation that occurs in this final stage is a clear demonstration of how mindsets can be trapped in a toxic cycle, where every decision made reinforces feelings of loss and loneliness, accelerating emotional collapse. Daniel was lost in a maze where abandonment was not just a possibility, but an existential threat that needed to be stopped at any cost, even if it meant crossing a line of no return. This uncomfortable reality exposes a facet of human nature that many prefer to ignore, that love, in its most distorted form, can become a double-edged sword, capable of cutting both the lover and the loved. It reveals the impact of invisible wounds, of decisions made in the heat of fear and pain, and the inner workings of a mind desperately trying to find meaning in a growing void. It is at this point in the story that we begin to understand how tenuous the line can be between love and despair, between life and death, between attachment and liberation. The revelations that emerge from this conflict are profound and disturbing, and invite us to reflect on the true consequences of choices made when the mind is in collapse. As you absorb all of this, perhaps something stirred within you, a stored memory, a pain that still refuses to heal, an indignation that finds no voice. If you'd like, write in the comments a word, a phrase, anything that represents what this story awakened in you. It doesn't matter if it's anger, sadness, confusion, or even a heavy silence you carry. This is what this space is for, a place where every outburst matters, where your experience resonates and helps build something greater than a simple story. Sharing these feelings, even if only in a word, creates an invisible connection between everyone here, a silent network of people seeking to understand, who feel together, who don't conform to what the world often tries to hide. It's in this hidden belonging, in this exchange of genuine emotions, that we find the strength to move forward, to continue uncovering stories that provoke, that transform, that challenge us to look within. When you leave a comment, you're helping not only yourself but also everyone who experiences this in silence. Your voice becomes part of the echo that drives this investigation, bringing to light the truths that need to be heard. This is a powerful way to contribute to continuing this journey, so that more people can connect and reflect deeply on what happens when love turns to pain and when decisions are made in the shadow of despair. Feel free to open up here, because we're not just telling a story, we're living a process of discovery, understanding, and transformation together. And this story still has much to reveal, layers that will only unfold with the participation of those on the other side, willing to feel, think, and above all, not remain silent in the face of the human complexity it exposes. The day of the execution arrived with a dense, heavy atmosphere, where each second seemed to carry an invisible burden too great to bear. Witnesses present reported something no one expected. Daniel was trembling. It wasn't the tremor of fear of death, that final inevitable fear many imagine grips the condemned. It was a different, deeper tremor, emanating from the weight of remorse, from the knowledge that the words he so longed to speak would never reach the one he loved. At that moment, the emptiness of the cell seemed greater than ever, and the loneliness of what he faced became almost palpable. It was the silence of a soul, knowing that the forgiveness it seeks will never be granted. For Clara's absence was permanent. And minutes before receiving the lethal injection, something unexpected happened. Daniel turned to the camera, looked into the eyes of those watching, and uttered a phrase that marked not only that day, but the entire discussion surrounding what it means to love and lose. I don't speak for myself. I speak for all the men who confuse love with possession. I just wanted to be seen. The power of that confession resonated far beyond the prison walls. A simple sentence, yet loaded with a brutal truth that struck directly at the heart of discussions in criminology, criminal psychology, and even sociology schools. What Daniel revealed was more than an apology. It was a sharp critique, an outburst that exposed a toxic mindset, a pattern many recognize but few dare to confront. This statement, in its quiet impact, paved the way for profound discussions about how love can be confused with control, how the need to be seen and recognized can transform legitimate feelings into dangerous weapons. It shed light on the mental transformation that occurs when one's identity is so intertwined with another that the fear of disappearing with it generates disproportionate reactions, decisions that forever mark not only the lives involved but also the surrounding social fabric. Behind this speech lies a story of emotional fractures and decisions made under pressure, where the line between the desire to love and the need to possess becomes blurred, almost invisible. The impact of this moment is not limited to the legal judgment, but expands to reflections that challenge us to understand how love, when distorted, can become the most destructive force within the human mind. That it's also a reminder of the power of words on the threshold between life and death, a sign that, even in his final moments, Daniel sought to leave a message that transcended time and simplistic concepts of right and wrong. He didn't want to be seen simply as a criminal, but as someone carrying a painful truth, a confession that speaks of the shadows that inhabit possessive love and the tragedy that can arise from such deception. This hidden truth is a fundamental piece to understanding not only Daniel's case, but many others where violence arises in the name of distorted feelings, where the transformation of the mind is silent and devastating. Every word spoken in that final moment carries the weight of the decisions that culminated in that moment, revealing the impact of years of suffering, fear, and desire that fused into an uncontrollable emotional storm. Understanding this moment is crucial to advancing our understanding of criminal psychology and the patterns that lead to human tragedies. It reveals the inner workings of a torn mind, the internal conflict that transforms what could have been a loving gesture into an irreversible action. And above all, it's an invitation to reflect on the profound consequences our own mindsets and choices can generate when we fail to recognize the limits of affection and the dangers of possessiveness. Stay with me until the end, because the story you're about to discover will reveal further layers of this complex emotional web, showing how the impact of the past and the decisions of the present intertwine to create destinies that will never be forgotten. The truth that emerges from this is disturbing, powerful, and above all, human. I killed because I loved, and I hate myself for it to this day. These words continue to echo, spanning the years and debates, a grim reminder of the chasm that can exist between what we feel and what we do. They are not just Daniel Wexler's final confession. They are a symbol that pulsates in the depths of cases of emotional violence, a voice that defies simplistic understanding and demands that we look into the deepest layers of the human mind. This sentence carries within it the weight of the emotional complexity that motivates crimes marked by feelings as intense as they are destructive. It's not easy to fit it into the box of classic crime of passion, because, although the term conjures up the idea of an act driven by passion and momentary impulse, what Daniel revealed points to something more intricate and lasting. It's a portrait of a mental transformation that goes beyond the moment of the crime, a sequence of decisions and internal processes that leads someone to lose control of their own identity, to collapse under the weight of emotional dependence and the pain of abandonment. When we reflect on this confession, we are forced to face an uncomfortable truth: the way society educates and shapes the male mindset regarding love is far from simple or healthy. There are expectations, standards, and unspoken rules that impose a distorted view of what it means to love and be loved, where vulnerabilities are denied and possession is confused with genuine affection. This distortion creates an invisible shadow that falls over many relationships, fueling a cycle of suffering and, in extreme cases, violence. Experts continue to debate whether Daniel's crime reflects this cultural problem or expresses an individual pathology. What is clear is that his case exposes the inner workings of a mindset undergoing a gradual but devastating transformation. Decisions made, repressed feelings, and hidden truths intertwined to form a narrative that defies any attempt at simplification. The impact of this sentence goes far beyond the prison where Daniel spent his final days. It has become a topic of study at universities, the subject of articles and heated discussions that attempt to understand the mechanisms of the human mind in the face of possessive love and the pain of rejection. More than that, it's an invitation to reflect on how each of us may be trapped, to a greater or lesser extent, in patterns that lead us to dangerous and irreversible decisions. The hidden truth behind this crime reveals that love can be as powerful a force to create as it is to destroy. This duality is what makes cases of emotional violence so difficult to decipher and, at the same time, so essential to understanding the complexity of human relationships. It's a transformation that involves not only the individual, but also the context in which they live, the narrative surrounding them, and the choices that fate imposes. Revealing these layers also means understanding the impact these stories have on all of us, even those who have never experienced anything similar. It's a mirror for our own relationships, a warning about the decisions we make in the heat of fear and insecurity, an opportunity to question how we educate love and what we accept as normal. And it is precisely in this reflection that lies the key to preventing tragedies like this from happening again. The phrase that stuck, the echo that still haunts, forces us to look beyond the surface, to the details that often remain hidden in the shadows of headlines. It is an invitation to delve into the behind-the-scenes of human behavior, to understand the motivations that go beyond the violent act, and to recognize that, ultimately, each crime carries within it a complex set of internal and external transformations. What happened to Daniel is not an anomaly, a lost cause forgotten in statistics. On the contrary, it is a grim portrait of a reality that repeats itself silently in the less illuminated corners of men's lives around the world. How many Daniels are there out there, trapped in their own spirals of pain, anger, and despair, unable to express what they feel without it turning into something toxic and dangerous? This disturbing question is a call to look beyond the obvious and understand the emotional undercurrents that fuel tragedies like this. The silent spiral that binds these men is made of repression, the habit of swallowing emotions, stifling vulnerabilities under the guise of strength. It's the weight of a mentality that teaches that feeling is weakness, that crying is only permitted in secret, that suffering must be endured alone, in silence. This repression doesn't disappear. It builds, intensifies, creating a minefield within. The mind where any spark can trigger a devastating explosion. Then there's idealization. What for many should be pure love becomes an unattainable myth, a standard they can never reach. They cling to images of perfection that never match reality, creating suffocating expectations that, when frustrated, fuel a corrosive feeling of failure and abandonment. It's a vicious cycle where the pursuit of something perfect turns into an emotional prison, where every small crack becomes an internal earthquake. Denial, in turn, functions as a precarious shield, a way to escape the painful reality they don't want or can't face, denying feelings, denying the problem, denying their own fragility. It's a dangerous dance, because while the world sees only the surface, they fight invisible demons that corrode their identity, tear at their self-esteem, and darken the horizon. This denial creates a kind of emotional black hole that sucks away any shred of hope, pushing them ever closer to the brink. Behind the "I did it because I loved it" statement, there's almost always an untold story, a past marked by silent traumas, by wounds that never received attention, a neglected childhood where affection was scarce or conditioned, where the example of healthy love was replaced by toxic patterns that taught the wrong meaning of relationships. These deep scars shape the way these men see the world, how they interpret the gestures of those they love, how they decide to act when fear of abandonment takes over. A fractured identity, fragmented by these unresolved experiences and feelings, is the breeding ground for the most tragic decisions. When one's sense of self is so eroded that the other becomes one's only anchor, one's only reason for existence, any threat to this bond is perceived as an existential threat. And the response, however wrong, is born of the desperation to hold onto something that has already been lost, of the fear of facing the loneliness and emptiness that grow in silence. This pattern is not isolated in criminal psychology. It resonates in many accounts, in diverse contexts, like an uncomfortable truth that insists on being revealed. It is a mental transformation that, if not understood and addressed, can lead to irreversible consequences. The mind trapped in this cycle doesn't know how to escape, doesn't recognize alternatives, and finds no light in the internal labyrinths it has constructed. Exploring this silent spiral is more than an academic exercise. It's an invitation to examine the complexity of human decisions, the impact that emotional undercurrents have on each act. It's understanding that, behind the barbarity, lies a story of pain that needs to be heard, even when the voice telling it is that of a condemned man. This understanding broadens our vision, transforms our mindset, and challenges us to question the truths we take for granted. It reveals how ignorance and silence can be complicit in the tragedies that shock and shake society. And most of all, it reminds us that love, when left unchecked, can become the most destructive impulse. As we delve into these dark layers of the human mind, it becomes clear that understanding these cases goes far beyond a simple anecdote or passing news story. It's an invitation to a deeper journey, a silent transformation that occurs when we begin to question our own beliefs and examine the hidden truths that permeate human behavior. If you feel this curiosity, this need to go beyond the surface and unravel the mysteries behind seemingly inexplicable actions and decisions, this is the right place to be. Here, we're not content with easy answers or simplistic explanations. We seek the details, the behind-the-scenes details, the revelations that few have the courage to explore. And that's precisely why your presence makes all the difference. When you subscribe, you're not just ensuring you'll receive future content, you're strengthening a community that wants more than stories. It wants understanding, it wants connection, it wants the raw truth that so many try to hide, the transformation. This type of content goes beyond entertainment. It provokes reflection, questioning, and change. It's an invitation for each of us to examine ourselves, our own decisions, and the shadows that still lurk within each of us. And believe me, what's yet to come is even deeper, more impactful, and full of nuances that will surprise you. So, if this uneasiness you feel now resonates, if the desire to discover what lies behind these cruel and human accounts calls to you, sign up. Not by simply clicking, but by being part of something bigger, a community that values truth, courage, and transformation. It is in this movement that the message gains strength, that the impact multiplies, and that stories like Daniel's continue to be told, analyzed, and above all, understood. What if loving were the only way to feel alive? What if losing that love were in fact like dying long before your last breath? It hurts to think about that, doesn't it? Because deep down, it's a reality many carry in silence, a truth hidden behind the most extreme actions, behind decisions no one would want to make. Daniel Wexler's case isn't just a story of crime or punishment. It's a warning, a mirror that reflects unspoken pain, invisible fears, and patterns that need to be unraveled so that tragedies like this don't happen again. This isn't a narrative that demands judgment. On the contrary, it demands understanding, a perspective that goes beyond appearances, that seeks to understand the hidden motivations, the deep wounds that shape devastating behaviors. It's an invitation to recognize human complexity and to consider prevention, the importance of transforming mindsets before the impact becomes irreversible. If you felt anything while listening to this story, if any part of it touched a pain, a silence, or a memory you carry, know that you are not alone. These themes touch the most sensitive parts of us all, because they speak of love, fear, and loss, universal feelings, but which can manifest in very different and, at times, dangerous ways. It is in this space of reflection that this channel thrives, bringing together people who want to go beyond the surface, who seek to understand the nuances of the human stories behind crimes, who want to find meaning and learning where there seems only despair. If this search resonates with you, if the desire to continue exploring these complex and emotional narratives pulses within you, subscribing here is more than a simple gesture. It's a way to be part of a community that values knowledge, empathy, and transformation. Each new piece of content is designed to bring hidden truths to light, reveal the behind-the-scenes details of life-changing decisions, and provoke a silent transformation in those willing to listen and feel. And I guarantee, what's yet to come will deepen this perspective even further, revealing layers few dare explore, and which could forever change the way we understand love and violence. If you've made it this far, you know this story isn't just another case. It's a piece of the puzzle we're trying to piece together about what truly moves human beings in the shadows of love and pain. If this message resonated with you in any way, leave a comment like "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." It's important to know that we're together in this search for understanding, justice, and the hidden truth that so many try to hide. If you felt this connection that crossed your screen, leave a like. It's not just a gesture. It's a sign that you recognize the complexity of these stories, that you understand their impact, and that you want to be part of this network that doesn't accept lies or forced silence. Because the justice we seek here goes beyond sentences. It's the kind that questions, provokes, and transforms. And since this path is paved with discovery, there's a video here that complements this topic, showing other layers and revelations you can't miss. Click there and stay with me there, because understanding these behind-the-scenes details is essential to truly seeing what's behind so many life-changing decisions, and this journey deserves to be taken slowly, step by step, always delving deeper. Stay with me, because what comes next is just as important as what we just uncovered.